Joining us now is Naomi Klein, columnist at The Nation magazine, fellow at the Nation Institute, and author of the book, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, which is, in effect, a book-length warning of all this. Naomi, thank you for being here.
Glad to be with you, Rachel.
Do you see disaster capitalism at work in these state budget fights? Because I do.
Yes, I definitely do. But it's important to remember that these guys have been at this for 30 years. I mean, they're part of an ideological movement, and they believe in a whole bunch of stuff that's not very popular. You know, there are some policies in the ideological Republican playbook that a lot of people like. Everyone likes a tax break. But if you talk about, privatizing the local water system, busting unions, privatizing entire towns, things like this, if you run an election and say, this is what I plan to do, chances are you will lose that election. And this is where crises come in. They're very, very handy because you can say we have no choice. You don't have to win the argument anymore. You just have to say the sky is falling in. We have to do this. You can consolidate power. We remember this from the Bush administration. They did this at the federal level after 9/11. They said we have a crisis and we have to essentially rule by fiat. So the first stage is to consolidate power. But that's not the end goal. It's not just to hoard the power. It's then to auction off the state, because these guys really don't believe in the governments that they're running. I mean, this is a really old story. But if we look at what's going on in Wisconsin, why are they so desperate to tie the hands of unions? Why are 16 states facing similar battles? Unions are the final line of defense against privatization of the public sector. Unions are the ones who fight privatization of the school system, of the water system, of the power system. That's where the real money is, and we've got to keep our eye on the prize, because there's a lot of money to be made in the kinds of crony deals that can be rammed through when you have all of that power consolidated in governor's office.
You think that this is about trying to achieve ideological aims that people wouldn't necessarily vote for, but also about changing the process, sort of putting their thumb on the scales so that the process is easier for them to keep making more decisions like this in the future? Well,
absolutely, because unions are a political force. I mean, they represent their members, but they also they give them a political voice. And, in that fake conversation with David Koch, when Scott Walker thought he was talking to David Koch, there was something really revealing that he said. He said, "This is our moment to change the course of history." That's what he said when he thought he was talking to David Koch.
And the reason that he purports to have identified that moment is because Wisconsin has a budget deficit.
Right.
And so therefore that gives you a reason to change the course of history.
Change the course of history, to lock in the whole wish list of policies. And he specifically compared himself to Ronald Reagan and the air traffic controllers strike. This was his moment, and he said that was the moment that ended communism. And what's the crusade that they're fighting here? And they really want a corporate monopoly state. They don't want to have any countervailing force balancing out the power of corporations. And so unions are also a political force at the national level, at the state level. And we're in this bizarre situation where Citizens United has allowed corporations essentially to go nuclear on the political stage. If we think of this as a kind of a war, one side just got nukes. They are absolutely unconstrained. And now they're going after the slingshots that the other side has.
Right. Well, the one pseudo bit of competition they've got in terms of big money in politics. I mean, unions are able to pool the resources of their members in order to try to compete with these big guys, but they're the only ones who even crack the top 10 in terms of corporate giving.
Exactly, exactly. So there's a few different things, different agendas going on.
Are you heartened by the way this has worked out in Wisconsin? Protests in Wisconsin effectively stopping what was happening there, even as the National Republican Party decided to adopt Wisconsin as their signal fight for the country.
I mean, I'm so heartened by it, Rachel. I mean, it's extraordinary. And, just listening to your opening commentary, this very well may be the turning point. And what we're seeing is that when people do fight, they sometimes win, which is a really well-kept secret. That, in all the sort of mocking of protests in our, glib postmodern times, sometimes they win, especially if you're willing to do more than, just go to a march once. And just the tenacity of people in Madison, it's so inspiring.
Well, when you have traveled around the world documenting disaster capitalism, the shock doctrine, when you have, and I know you travel around the world speaking on this topic as well, what have you been able to find out about what makes for effective resistance?
Yeah.
I mean, people stand up against this stuff whenever it happens. Sometimes they do so in a way that works, and sometimes they do so in a way that doesn't work. What makes the difference about whether or not people can win against this?
Well, the key is to name it while it's happening, and that's why I wrote this history, a history of how the right has won around the world by exploiting these moments of crisis, because this has been their signature tactic, but we have not been on to them. If the whole point of using a crisis, of using a shock, is that in those moments of crisis, we're disoriented. Yeah, but if we name it while it's happening, as people have been doing in Wisconsin, then the tactic doesn't work. But in addition to that, you also have to say, you also have to have your own story about what is really causing the crisis. And also, if you do have a budget deficit, and there are many states that genuinely are facing budget crises because of a crisis that was created on Wall Street, that was moved to Main Street. I mean, this crisis, as we know, was deepened by the policy decisions that were made. The decision to bail out the banks instead of bailing out homeowners, instead of bailing out workers, and what that means is that your tax base collapses. So your tax base collapsed, and now we have to pay for the crisis again. First we paid with a bailout, and now people are paying with it with budget cuts. So I think the really key part of the resistance is that people are saying, you know what, if you really need some money, why don't you go where the money is? Why don't you go to the people who have all the money and putting their own proposals on the table, whether that means Bank of America for not paying their taxes, or whether that means defense contractors, or whether that means oil and gas companies and their subsidies. I mean, people are putting all kinds of proposals on the table, and that is also deflating the strategy of we have no choice, because of course there are all kinds of choices, and what this fight is really about is not unions versus taxpayers, as we've been told. It's a fight about who's going to pay for the crisis that was created by the wealthiest elite in this country. Is it going to be regular working people, or is it going to be the people who created the crisis? And that's the debate we need to have.
Understanding it and explaining it is, I mean, it's stupid to say that's half the battle, but in this case I think it really is. And you are helping. Naomi Klein, thank you so much. It's really nice to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Rachel.